Hello, my name is Austin Belzer. Welcome back to Austin B Media. Today I'm here with Robert Kenner and Melissa Robledo, and apologies if I mispronounced any of that, the co-directors of Food Inc. 2. I'm so excited to discuss this documentary. I saw it last night. Let's get started. Welcome.
Good to be here,
Thank
Austin.
you.
Yeah, it's good. It's uh, interesting thing. I don't know if people know this, but Food Inc. was I think my first documentary I watched, other than the I think Ben Stein documentaries. Um, so this is a interesting moment for me. Yeah, let's talk about this. Why did you feel compelled to make a sequel to Food Inc? I believe 16, 17 years later.
We didn't really feel compelled to make a film. We, for the longest time, thought we would never want to enter this space again. As filmmakers, the greatest thing, documentary filmmakers, is that you like to enter a subject when you know nothing about it and you can learn like your audience learns. So the idea of a sequel always felt it was not that exciting an idea, even though we were approached to do one for a number of years. We had nothing necessarily new to say. I think what happened is in the first film, we really thought we could help change the food system, that eaters were really interested in knowing where their food came from and wanted to shop ethically. And we thought you could change the food system one bite at a time. We highlighted how Walmart was doing certain things and how you could influence corporations into doing the right thing. And we thought we were done with food. Made films about numbers of different subjects since then. But when the pandemic hit, it exposed the brutality of this consolidated food system in a way that we felt compelled to re-enter it. And it wasn't because of the pandemic that the brutality and the consolidation existed before the pandemic and exists today. But when you saw workers being called essential and being put into plants without any protection, and many of them dying, and the managers betting on how many were going to die next week, or farm workers being told there was no contact tracing, and that the bottom line was these companies wanted to make money and they didn't care at all about their workers. And we felt that the audience is a little more interested in that subject today. And we also thought we could talk about foods that these companies are making that are very profitable, these ultra-processed foods, but yet they're not good for the farmers who make it, and they're not good for the people who eat it. And we thought this was reason to re-enter this arena.
Yeah, and I feel like you go really in depth into that. While you're talking, I'm thinking of the Waterloo, Iowa chapter of this documentary, which I believe, if my notes are right, at 13,000 in the first week, and it exponentially went up. Pacific tomato growers in, can't pronounce the city, but
Immokalee.
And then I believe Impossible Foods is the other one with the ultra processed foods. And let's use that as a transition point to talk about the ultra processed foods. I want to talk about the study Kevin Hall conducted. I know I'm getting into a little bit into the weeds here. For people who don't know what necessarily I'm talking about, he did a study where he took the ultra processed diet and the minimally processed diet that you can eat much or as little as you want. Try to match it up as simply as possible, as comparative as possible. And I guess, were you surprised by the results of this study? Did you know about the study going into it? Love to hear your thoughts.
We thought those results were absolutely shocking. There's been a lot of literature, a lot of studies done, correlational studies about the impacts of ultra-processed foods on our health. Like a diet high in ultra-processed foods is linked to some 32 diseases, and there just continue to be studies showing the deleterious effects of consuming too much ultra-processed food. But this is the only study to directly compare those two diets in a clinical setting. And what they found was that it's the same people. 1 week they're on one diet, the next week they're on the other, and they're compared to another group that's doing the opposite. And across the board, the participants, when they were on the ultra processed diet, they ate an average of 500 calories more per day. And this is just voluntary eating, the same people the week later. And it's it's just a shocking number. And so we thought it was fascinating and really important work to show. He has theories about why that is. And so there will be more research forthcoming. But we found it shocking.
What's so interesting is Kevin Hall didn't believe that would be the case when he started the study. So it's always interesting when a scientist goes to prove something and finds out it's just the opposite. And that's when you know you're dealing with a real scientist. And as Marion Nessel said, she's been around and she's never heard of 500 calories more per day in any study. She said maybe 25, maybe 50. But the idea that they're eating 500 more calories per day is unheard of. And that was really the sort of understanding ultra-processed food is probably the biggest new thing that's happened since our first film. Is we talked about sugar, salt, and fat in the first film, and we talk about diabetes. But there's the new study that ultra-processing itself is really bad for one's health. And that's going to be very hard for food companies because they're not going to be able to say a little less ultra-processed. You can say less sugar, but you can't say less ultra-processed.
Yeah, I think I saw something recently. I don't even know if this is true, that Chick-fil-A started putting up signs of we're limiting, I forget the language, but they're saying they're limiting human safe. They were talking something about human safe additives. They changed the verbiage of their additives, which I found quite interesting.
We'll have to look into that. I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, I'll have to. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening this week. I read another article today about some additives in the ocean, like yeah, anyways, not to get too in the weeds there, but let's go a little bit. Yeah, let's talk about a little bit more about the data because I'm a big data nerd. That you show me numbers, I'm gonna obsess over them. I wrote all the relevant data down in my review notes. It's just what I do. My question is,
what stood out for you in the data?
For me, I know you talk about the 4 pillars. You talk about the jump of the meat processing share being from 25% now to 85%. And just those 4 columns you talk about were the biggest ones. But actually, I think the biggest...
You're talking about consolidation there.
Yes, I'm talking about the
4 biggest meatpacking companies.
Yeah, Cargill and the 3 others I can't remember right now.
Smithfield, BPI.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And the PepsiCo study was another one on the sweetness and calorie correlation, which is another case of you talk about scientists trying to prove one thing and finding out the other thing. But my question is, how do you convey that data in a meaningful way while also keeping it, not trying to create a disconnect, trying to make it visually engaging and accessible to an audience that maybe doesn't know exactly what those numbers mean?
We're trying to make a film that is both informative and entertaining. So we're in a weird way, but you can't just provide information to people. It's hard to swallow, if using a food metaphor. People want to sit down on a couch and watch something that keeps them interested. And we try to add as much humor, we try to add as much emotion, and at the same time, satisfy their need to know what's good to be eating, what's good for you, and what's good for the planet. So I think we go into it thinking, how can we, make our audience feel satisfied? And I don't know if entertained is the right word, but not feel like they're being fed medicine.
I might have to steal that quote. But yeah, I just think it's interesting because you have to use a lot of data. If you don't use that, I think there's that risk of, oh, this is not applicable to me because I'm not seeing the numbers or something like that, or whatever excuse somebody would use.
I'd say I'll just interject to say that in the case
Sure.
of the 4 meat packing companies, what we're trying to show is that the consolidated power has just gotten more intensified. And that's what we're showing is the accumulation of that we're seeing that there's just a smaller and smaller handful of companies controlling all aspects along our food chain. And that's not good for workers. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for eaters. And that's ultimately, we're using the data to show that this is based in fact.
And
Yes.
we were shocked by the level of consolidation, and it really eliminates competition. We live in a free society, and yet we've gotten to the point where there are just a few companies controlling every aspect. And here we have 2 companies controlling baby formula, and one of them goes down, and it becomes a very brittle system where babies no longer can get formula. And we need a more diversified, healthier food system for all of us to survive.
Yeah, I remember when we were watching it last night, me and my mom, when that section hit, we were, oh yeah, we forgot about that. And it happened what, 4 years ago?
It's still happening. It's going on right now. It's amazing, but you do forget. I think one of the things we do as filmmakers is collect all these different pieces that people might know about, but you arrange them in a pattern and try to have people see that pattern.
Yeah, and I guess going on that pattern, something I keyed in on. You use chapters in the documentary. So there's a rise of the quote unquote what I like to call the docu-series. Was there ever, I think, an attempt to maybe try and flesh the narrative of this out into a larger series like that?
We just finished a series for Netflix before and thought we wanted to keep it a little more concise and avoid the filmic bloat that sometimes exists.
You said, "No, we're good. No, don't like the editing." I'm sure the editing process was bad, but yeah. And getting back to what we were talking about consolidation in your investigation, I guess how long was this investigation? Because earlier you show in the Kansas City section you show footage from as far back as 2017.
We weren't filming at that time. We used earlier footage to tell a longer story.
Got it. So I guess
we started in 2020, right?
We did.
That's shocking. It was a long process.
I'd imagine the food industry is, yeah, a lot changes even in a week. So I can imagine that, yeah. But I guess my question is, in that process, regarding consolidation, did you find any? I know we already talked about surprising things about consolidation. Surprising things did you find that we haven't talked about yet?
I was fascinated by Marion Nestle talking about how basically we're supposed to be eating 2,000 calories a day rather, and we're producing 4,000 calories. So these companies have a hard time figuring out how to get us to eat more food. So I found that a really fascinating aspect of how ultimately they're creating food that's paying farmers far less for their product and ultra processing this food and then charging the consumers more. And that process is really interesting. And I think it's shown how we've gotten to such a sort of vulnerable place with healthcare and all the disease that's going on. And I was surprised at how much that almost 2/3 of the American diet is ultra processed. And I found that really shocking. When we made Food Inc. 1, I was certainly aware that lower income people had a hard time affording healthy vegetables and things like that. But I think it's also people who can afford stuff who are now eating ultra processed food and becoming sick from it. So that was one of the things that I found most interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the first food inc, I think, caused our paleo diet as a family, or that's where it ultimately ended up. And even now, where I think there's a real, I don't know what the technical term would be, is it's more convenient for the ultra processed foods. You talk about it a little bit in the beginning, I believe, when you talk about the gap between food being 1 and 2, where you're talking about the organic foods becoming corporatized. It's become that thing where it's becoming even more prohibitively expensive to avoid those additives, right? And to the point where it's goodness, where it's almost becoming cyclical of, oh, we want to eat these health foods, and then you eat the health foods, and then they're the same as the health food, the ultra processed foods you were trying to avoid, which causes you to eat even more ultra processed foods. At least,
Well, the problem, Austin, is that we are subsidizing the unhealthy food and we are not subsidizing the healthy food. So this unhealthy food we're paying for in our tax dollars through the farm bill, and yet we're then also paying for it through healthcare because it's making us sick. And I think that one of the things that we would like to see changed is to reprioritize that we can start to incentivize healthier food.
thank you so much.
So much. Okay,
Can't wait for people to watch this on April 12th.
great.
Great. Thanks.
April 9th.
April 9th, limited, April 12th, VOD.